Today, we're just going to take a moment to pause as grade 12 or senior students begin firming up their college lists, thinking about the overall strategy that they will be employing. We thought that it's going to be a good idea for us to take a moment to pause and think about how decisions are being made. And so we've walked through various terms and ideas in the past when thinking about the right school fit for you as a student, perhaps as a family, some of the considerations that you are considering when you are thinking about what is the return on the investment going to look like for me as a parent, for us as a family, and for the student themselves. Oftentimes, the easy thing to do is to turn to rankings, choose the top 10 schools, and apply to those. And so today, what we're going to do is really think about how do we complicate this particular way of looking and researching schools? How do we reframe the questions that we are asking, taking into account that rankings do provide a good starting point and framework from which we can think about the various universities that we might be applying to, but how do we also go beyond rankings? And so today we're really going to take a moment to pause and sit to think about what are the methodologies behind some of this. How do people actually approach rankings and what are they actually measuring when they are doing these particular rankings? And we'll also think about how different organizations, providers, think tanks may rank universities in different ways. And all of this is to help you as students think about how you're able to really take pieces of information from various sources, whether it is Times Higher Education or niche, or maybe it is US news that you're looking at. It's really taking all of that information, reading through it, and then prioritizing and creating a ranking system that is more tailored to what you are looking for as a student and as a family. So to start us off, I think that it's important to actually ask, why do we care about rankings? So rankings actually definitely influence the types of schools that students are applying to. We need to think about what is the investment that the family is actually making when selecting a university that they will be applying to. And really importantly, I think it's also about institutional competition. And so you have these various different, not necessarily competing, but different priorities that might influence the way in which a ranking is done, but then also how the information on a ranking is utilized. And sometimes I think it's really important to ask ourselves, what is the difference between a university that's ranked 50th versus one that's ranked 10th? And how do we actually think about what those gaps or differences actually mean and how that will translate into the actual experience, both academically, educationally, but also in terms of student well-being. And then the last step to that is thinking about what happens post-graduation. So how do we really read through rankings in order to make sound decisions? Also important to note is that there's billions in funding and reputation that is tied to these lists. I do think that it's equally as important to note and to be transparent about the fact that rankings definitely does impact certain bottom lines of universities. So take, for example, there are certain universities that as they've moved higher in rank, they are receiving more and more applications each year. And what that essentially does is that if University X was formerly ranked 70th on a list, and the next year they are 50th, and the next year they are 30th, and then so on and so forth, and they are climbing in the ranks, you're going to find that more and more students are applying to those universities. And what this then translates into is that a university can quickly move from having an acceptance rate of, let's say, approximately 30% or 28%. But as application numbers increase significantly, the number of seats available at a university is not increasing. So that means 28% acceptance rate is then closer to 14 acceptance rate 4 years or 5 years down the line. And that increases the prestige and the desirability of that particular university. And that might mean that they get more funding, The reputation just really balloons at some stage. And this is important to keep in mind when you are reviewing this. So, rankings, as I mentioned, are a good starting point, but it's really important to interrogate it, question it, and think about what exists beyond the rankings as well. And then finally, it is really important to remember that rankings are one tool. They do not tell the full story. And that is something that we'll touch on a little bit in today's session as well. So, when we think about rankings, what are they actually measuring? And where do they get this data from? And so, on a very surface level, we can look into things on what are the graduation rates? Are people actually graduating from a university when they started? And for most universities, you're going to have a very high graduation rate number. However, there are some universities that might be slightly more challenging, or perhaps it is a very niche and small university where instead of taking 4 years to complete a university degree, it could take up to 5.5, 6 years to complete it. It also depends on program specific information too. The other bit is around retentions. I think that it's important, specifically as international students, to think about how many students who start at a particular university are actually completing and graduating from that university. And this is a core metric that many ranking systems do evaluate and measure. In addition to that, some information that is utilized in whether a university is highly ranked or ranked a bit lower is the faculty resources as well as student to faculty ratio. And so, what we typically find is that a ratio of, I'm just going to throw up a random number there, but 20 to 1, right? Or 1 to 20, one faculty to every 20 students. Those universities tend to be a little bit more niche, a little bit more exclusive, a little bit more desirable. And so, therefore, their ranking increases versus a large research university that might have a faculty student ratio of 1 to 100. And this is important, I believe, when thinking about as a student, what type of learning environment do I need in order to thrive? In addition to that, there are various other things through academic reputation surveys, research output, and citations. So, if you are a student who is really invested in research, for example, you might want to have a look at the research rankings and whether or not, as an undergraduate student, you'd be able to engage in research with your faculty members and professors. In addition to that, we can also have financial resources per student, selectivity and acceptance rates, which I mentioned earlier, as well as alumni giving and employment outcomes. And so within these rankings, I always find it an interesting but an understandable measurement when thinking about how many alumni actually donate back to a university after graduation or contribute to the sustainability of the university, whether it's through giving time, engaging, being a mentor, providing an internship for current students, etc. This is really important to think about the culture and the community that you'll be a part of. And so this is just some of the core metrics that many different ranking organizations utilize when doing some of this work. However, there are some things that are not always measured in this particular industry of ranking universities. So, teaching quality and mentorships. I don't know if many ranking systems actually utilize student surveys on the teaching quality as well as mentorship available to students. It's also something that is very qualitative and some might even argue subjective. As a college student myself, I had many great faculty mentors, but I can't recall any survey that I did that asked me if I had a strong faculty mentor as well as mentors outside of the academic staff. So, what are the other support systems that students have available to them that actually improve the overall education experience at a particular university? And this then leads into student happiness and a sense of belonging. I can imagine that some of the most highly ranked universities that happen to be large research universities may be it may be more challenging to feel a great sense of belonging, as opposed to, let's say, for example, a liberal arts college that is very small, where as an individual student, you have wraparound support. It's not to say that these systems and support structures don't exist at larger universities, but from my experiences and even just talking to some of my friends, I did have a very different experience from those who went to larger universities. And perhaps the sense of belonging does not matter as much to you as a student. So, this is also something to keep in mind as you review rankings and think about what are the best types of universities for you. Leading into this is also mental health and wellness support. It is becoming a more and more pressing issue that some ranking systems are considering when finalizing how they are rating certain universities. Some other work that is not always transparent on rankings is around internships and experiential learning opportunities, career readiness and alumni engagement, as well as campus culture and diversity. What I do find is that over the past decade or so, I've been noticing that ranking systems are becoming a little bit more rigorous and thinking about the gaps that exist. So it's not simply looking at a school profile and thinking about the measurable data, but they are diving a little bit deeper into thinking what is the student experience like? And how do we weight that when considering what are the quote unquote best universities in the world? Again, feeding into this idea of ranking and a hierarchy. So it's simultaneously beneficial to have that information, to think through the different methodologies, as well as to think about what is missing. And so I encourage all parents and students, whenever looking at any ranking system, to really ask, what are they not measuring that might be important to me as a student? And so, from that student perspective, a school rank number 10 could still be a poor fit for your needs. And I intentionally phrased it in this particular way. I think that it's easy to have a look at a ranking system and say that you're applying to only top 30 universities. But what happens if majority of those universities in the top 30 are not a great fit for you as a student, both in terms of what you hope to achieve academically as well as socially, perhaps even post-graduation, so in terms of your career readiness and employability after graduating from university? I do think that these are important questions that you need to be asking yourself. Perhaps you're interested in a very niche industry that is better served by going to a university that is ranked 40th. And so you need to really ask yourself, where does the best program and environment exist for me as a student? In addition to that, it's really important to note that high rankings often prioritize prestige over personal experience. And so it's a catch-all. It doesn't consider each individual student's experience of that particular university. You'll always find that the name brand universities and highly ranked universities are those big ones that you can close your eyes and think about it. And all of those universities that pop into your head, I won't mention any because I do find them fantastic, but I think it's really important to also think about how prestige plays a role in this. There are some really innovative universities that have popped up globally over the past 20 to 30 years. But because they may not have the 100, 200, 300-year history as some other universities, they are lower ranked than those prestigious older universities. And so it is important to think about how much does prestige play a role in the rank of a particular university. In addition to this, and this is sort of like the final point around the implications for students, is that I believe that students should identify metrics that match their goals. And what this means is before making a decision or an assumption based on a ranking, students should sit back and think about how has this particular ranking system, let's say, for example, Forbes, how have they approached ranking universities? Are they measuring the same metrics that are important to me? Are there metrics that are missing? Are there metrics that I perhaps didn't think that I needed to track that they are actually measuring? And so try to identify what matches your goals and take it from that standpoint. And so this is something that I thought would be really important. It's a quick three-step exercise that students and parents can do together. So, step one is to simply list your top five priorities for college. And this could be anything from finding a very niche major or thinking about how you'd be able to combine, let's say, for example, engineering with public policy, and which universities will enable you to do that. And that could be one of your top five priorities. And so you think about this from an academic standpoint, from a personal and social standpoint, from a career readiness standpoint, and write those priorities down. Then circle which of those particular areas are measured in the rankings. And you might find that some of the areas are measured in Times Higher Education, others are measured in Forbes, others are measured in niche. And so it's really important to then think about how can you combine these various rankings to create a somewhat holistic or comprehensive image of how the university is going to benefit you as a student. And then finally, highlight the gaps to research independently the information that you need in order to make a sound decision. And you might find that, let's say, for example, having a student group that relates to your identity is really important, but the rankings haven't really touched on that. Once you've had a look at those particular rankings, then find the information through a forum or through the school website or something of the sort. And then you'd be able to create your own ranking system and weigh what's important to you. And so this is again how you can research the unmeasured metrics. Teaching quality. Have a look at NSSE surveys. Have a look at niche reviews. Find out what students are saying about these universities in various forums that you do find publicly online. Mental health support. You can find on a university website, if you look at the wellness center or counseling service, what the counselor ratios look like. You could also think about what are the wellness programs. So if as a student, I don't necessarily need to go and see a counselor or a therapist, what other wellness programs are there? Do they have specific days where students get to relax and meditate and maybe do yoga? Are there fun activities where I remember as a college student, they brought in rescue animals so that we had an opportunity to connect and bond with animals on the campus. That was a wellness program that you might find resonates with you as a student. Thinking also about career readiness. LinkedIn alumni data, this is a new resource that I found recently, and I find it so interesting and important to sort of read about what alumni are doing and how many internships do students actually gain and are successful in. From those internships, how many of them turn into full-time employment offers? This is really important information. Specifically, if I were a parent, I'd be really interested in this data to think about what are the employment opportunities for my child after they've gone through 4 years of university. Student belonging. Have a look at TikTok and Reddit. Students are blogging or vlogging their lives at every step of the way, and universities are actually utilizing social media in really good ways. They are doing a life in the day, or a day in the life of a particular student, or a day in the life of a faculty member, or someone who works in administration. It gives you an authentic view of what life is like, and some students do this in their personal capacity as well. And then finally, I think that the hands-on learning piece, as we think about the future of work, it's no longer just what knowledge and theories do you have, but rather how are you applying it? And this is becoming a key realm within people and hiring. So in human resources, we are seeing more and more companies who are looking for students who have some sort of tangible skills that they've gained as a student, not just a theoretical knowledge. And so you can think about as a student, do I have opportunities to take what I learn in the classroom and implement it through a community partnership? Or maybe it's through research, maybe it's through independent research like a thesis or a capstone project. or perhaps the school has a really fantastic internship program that is within the academic system so that one semester you are experiencing hands-on learning at a firm or a company or a startup. This then becomes valuable resources for you both as a student, but that can help you think about how are you reviewing a university overall. And this then leads into the question, why do rankings differ so much? You can find that on one ranking list. University Y is ranked 40th, and then on another, it is ranked 10th. This is because they are driven by different methodologies and weights. For certain ranking organizations, it may be more important, research may be more important. But for other ranking systems, perhaps student wellness is more important or employability is more important. And so this would then change the weights. And that's why I always encourage students and families to look beyond one system of ranking, but rather compare and contrast the various rankings that exist out there. And then finally, there's a methodology that is used, not necessarily the quality of a school. And so this can cause discrepancies because also surveys are not created in the same way. Over my professional life and career, I think it's really important to note, both for parents and students, how a survey asks a question can determine the weight and value and outcome of a particular answer. And so, for example, if you're asking me, did you have research opportunities? Yes, I did. Great. Did you have quality research opportunities that helped you in I can then go into detail. And so both of these are going to have the same weight, but the question is very different. And so it's important to think about how ranking systems then decipher what the sort of interpretation of the data actually means. And so, in thinking about this idea of methodology, I've done a little bit of research, and of course, more research could be done on this. So, this is just my perspective, and I want to make that very clear. So, the focus of US News, it's US colleges only. So, they are not taking a global or international perspective on this. First thing to note. In addition to that, there is a greater weight on graduate outcomes and social mobility because they're really thinking about what is the fabric of society? How does university add a provide a real value add for you as a person? Are you able to move and transform lives? So this is really important. This is some data that I found. It might be outdated, but they would weight graduation and retention 22% of the overall ranking score, faculty resources 20%, reputation 20%, and some other factors that they would consider is does the university provide financial aid for students? Going back to this idea of social mobility, so financial aid might be an important thing for this particular ranking system to measure. Alumni giving. This is again a link between thinking about do graduates then go on to be successful in their careers and earn really well for the industries that they are in? And are they able to then fall into giving back as well as philanthropy in other ways? And then finally, it's that selectivity piece. So again, selectivity is a tricky thing because you're competing with higher applications, same amount of seats, and that changes year in and year out. There was some recent data that I saw, and I'd be more than happy to share it with anyone that may request it. But looking at the overall admission trends, both in terms of overall admission students, statistics, as well as international specific statistics, we are now seeing some universities 10 years ago who may have admitted, let's say, for example, 3% international applicants. By this coming application season, they will only be admitting 1.94% of international applicants. And so that means that the school is highly selective, and that might boost the overall ranking that they have. And so this is really important to note when reading through something like the US news. Taking a different approach to this, that is more, to a certain extent, I'd say academic focused, we have Times Higher Education. And it's also important to note that they have multiple different rankings where they are measuring things from sustainability and impact to thinking about student wellness, as well as region-specific rankings. And so they have multiple different rankings that you could look at, but I did think it was important to maybe focus on the main one. And they've weighted it as 30% of teaching, 30% research and environment, the research environment, 30% research quality and citations. What this really means is that they look at how many times a faculty member or a former faculty member at a particular university has been cited in new research that is being done. So it takes that long approach to thinking about what is the academic history and pedigree of this particular university and the type of professors that they attract. In addition to that, you also have international outlook that is 7.5%, and then industry income and innovation, smaller, 2.5, but they do have specific rankings when it comes to employability at a later stage, which I do encourage students and families to have a look at. You also find QS World University Rankings, and these are larger pockets that are more generalized, so academic reputation, as opposed to Times Higher Education that looked at specific areas like teaching as well as research. The academic reputation is bundled up into 40%. Faculty student ratio, 20%. Citations is also really important. Employer reputation, who's hiring your graduates. This is something that QS will actually think about as well. And then finally, international diversity. And this is again thinking about both the academic as well as social environments where how do differing opinions and experiences contribute to your development as a student and as a person who would move into a very globalized world in the future. Some specialty and emerging rankings that are, I believe, are fascinating and really interesting. I've mentioned this before, but the LinkedIn employability rankings, so these focus on alumni job outcomes. Some of the questions that they are asking is which industries are students going into? How much are they being paid as opposed to other people who may hold a similar degree from a different university? Some of the questions are also about the emerging industries and are students being prepared academically to succeed in their careers and professional lives. Times Higher Education, they've been doing impact rankings on sustainability and SDGs. I find this to be a fascinating and really intriguing way to look at it. So, how are we actually approaching sustainability goals and development goals globally? Are universities thinking about their impact from the standpoint of the greater good of all? And how can alumni actually contribute to this, as well as work being done at those particular universities? Wall Street Journal, student experience, college pulse, return on investment. So you are, as a family, going to be investing a lot of money when thinking about the cost of university. Now, I would say on average, 100,000 US dollars per year that you're investing in your education for a university degree at a top tier university. So that's $400,000 over the course of your 4 year undergraduate degree. What does that investment look like for you as a family? Are you going to find a job that is going to, over time, not immediately, but give you a good return on that investment? And then Washington Monthly, thinking about social mobility and contributions to various communities as well. That's becoming really important. And I think that it is a good way to think beyond just the academic space and the reputation and some of the prestige that may, to a certain extent, sway a ranking from time to time. So, when choosing rankings based on goals, I think what's really important is to say, this is my focus. Which ranking do I go to first? Not only, but first. And so this is something that I've sort of put together, and students can use it when thinking about some of these particular questions. Because when, let's say, for example, thinking about employability, you're not only going to go to LinkedIn. You're going to go to LinkedIn, but then you're going to compare that data with, let's say, for example, Forbes, as well as US News, because they've also tracked certain information. And how do they compare with what LinkedIn has done? How do their methodologies differ? And how can I benefit from the work that has already been done? The request here is to say that as a student and as a family, it is not your sole responsibility to get the metrics and then to decipher it. Someone has already done the work for you, so utilize those resources. However, at the same time, the request is that you compare how those methodologies may influence the outcome. And in addition to that, how can you then go to your specific needs as a student? Are students doing English majors being hired? That is a question that has been posed for the past decade. Certain reports are showing that with the advancement of AI, liberal arts degrees are actually being favored amongst employers because there's a technical side to things that is needed in the future of work, but at the same time, flexible thinking, critical thinking, analytical thinking is weighing more than what, let's say, for example, expertise and skills in computer science may lead to, because we're finding that AI is now able to code itself. So, do we need more coders, or do we need people to think about code and to program, have that programming knowledge, but interrogation skills as well? So, that's going to be important when thinking about employability and what companies are looking for in students. And so, it's really important that you use ranking strategically. It's to discover and think about what opportunities lie ahead, not to rely on it to make a decision or to have a ranking make the decision for you. It is still your responsibility to create a personalized and internal ranking system that aligns with your goals. And focusing on the metrics and thinking about which ranking system is actually reviewing and measuring what is important to me. And this is why it's going to be critical as you go through the next 2 weeks, 3 weeks, maybe a month before applications are due, that you do independent research as well. And this is why we've done this in the past and we've talked about how to build a balanced college list. But it is really important to use great tools like the Reach Match Safety Framework. And there are so many different resources out there that approach this differently. I've removed safety from my vocabulary when working with students, but at the same time, it is important to have that as a framework. What are the universities that are going to be super competitive regardless of your fantastic academic and personal profile? As well as what are those universities that are going to give me what I need, but I'm more aligned because they might have a slightly larger acceptance rate. And so these are important questions for you to think about. Diversify your options across multiple rankings. So don't choose the top 10 in every single ranking system and say, this is my college list when you are meeting with your counselor. Rather focus on being very meticulous in selecting universities that span the entire ranking list. I personally do understand that prestige is important and it's always going to be important in the world that we live in. And so you will have some of those universities that have a big name brand and presence globally. But also important is to think about which are those universities that may be lesser known now, but they will provide you with the experience, skills, knowledge that you need in order to be successful in the future. And then finally, the balance around academic fit, the cost of attendance, as well as personal priorities should be the foundation of these decisions that you're making overall. My advice to students and families at this point is to create a spreadsheet of sorts where you create and weigh things based on your priorities. For me personally, if I was to recall my experience applying to university, it was important for me to focus on a really strong academic environment. As an international student and the first one in my family to attend university, I knew that I needed a support structure. And so student belonging and wellness was important in my considerations simply because this was a new experience where I couldn't necessarily go to my mom and ask, how do I navigate this? Because no one had had this experience in the past. And so I needed mentors at the university to guide me through that particular journey. And from a personal standpoint, I needed a place where I was given academic freedom as well as the ability to engage in discourse with others. That was really important to me. Instead of being told how to think, I wanted my thinking challenged. And so these are the ways in which you can think about yourself as a student and what you're going to need in order to be successful and happy. I think we oftentimes put success on a pedestal and then we don't really consider happiness, but there's a balance there as well. So, prioritizing employability and the return on investment, we've talked about some of this before, but I really want to focus on the block to my right, and I'm hoping it's your right as well, but looking at employer partnerships and job pipelines. Universities have a lot of information on this on their websites through their services, as well as information that you can request to think about where are people going to after graduating. You can, for example, have a look at some of the top tier tech companies out there. Where are they hiring from? And you'll find some of the expected names like MIT, Stanford, Cornell. But then you might find something unexpected like Lafayette College, and that might intrigue you and say, okay, I'm now interested in doing a little bit more research on this liberal arts college that I don't know much about. And then by doing this particular research, you can then focus on having that diversity in your application as well as balance in your application. So you're not only applying to the most well-known schools globally, but having a good balance of Ivy League university, Ivy plus universities, perhaps top 30 universities, and some liberal arts colleges that have strong pipelines to the industry that you want to go into. And I highly recommend that you do that. Niche rankings to consider: best value college, best undergraduate teaching. I'm a huge fan, and I don't know if it's because I'm an educator, but I'm a huge fan of this particular ranking because you also get the opportunity to see what students are saying about their professors. Most innovative schools, that's really important. And then, as we think about important questions globally, like climate change, who has a sustainable campus? Does it align with your personal views and values and what you hope to see in the future? Which universities are doing interesting things, both academically, but even in their architecture that promote sustainability and trying to get to carbon neutral? So these may be things that you are considering, and I would highly recommend having a look at this. And at the same time, there are also things that you should avoid when reviewing. Don't overreact. The difference between rank 5 and rank 15 is probably not going to make or break your future. So there are small differences, and a 9.5 ranking versus a 9.3 ranking shows that universities are actually on par. And you might want to go for that 9.3 ranking, but because the 9 point university, but because the 9.5 is higher, you then switch your opinion on it. Try not to do that. Focus on what you've done, your independent research in conversation with those rankings. Prestige also doesn't equal fit. The top ranked university globally may not fit your profile, and that's fine. I am more than certain that maybe number three might fit your profile. And again, reminding you that that small difference of number one to number three is not going to make or break your future. And then finally, many students don't understand the methodology before making decisions. And as a counselor, when I sit with students and I ask, why are you applying to this university instead of this university? They can come up with a lot of information that doesn't necessarily justify the decision, but rather they are walking around wanting to say it's more highly ranked. And that's fine. If that's what your decision has been, that's fine. But be transparent with your counselor so that they can then tell you, okay, totally understand, but the difference between University X and University Y is not that great for what you want to do as a student. And that's a conversation that happens. And so dialogue should be a major part of how you approach rankings, where you, as a student and a thinking human being, is having a conversation with the ranking, and then you're taking that conversation and having it with your parent, and then you're also having that conversation with the counselor so that you can fully understand how rankings may play a role in the decisions that you're making. Use multiple sources is the main idea of today's, or the main takeaway to a certain extent of today's webinar. Combine rankings, think about common data sets, think about alumni outcomes, explore student satisfaction surveys and reviews. Some of this is available online, and universities sometimes will publish it, or there are various clearinghouses that might have that information. Visit campuses, attend virtual tours, talk to admissions reps, talk to students so that you get a sense from people who are there every day, living and breathing within those universities, and get a sense of how they feel about it. So then this leads to a checklist that I think you can have in your back pocket at any moment in time. Does the school match my priorities? Do I know what this ranking measures? Have I cross-checked multiple data sources? Have I considered what's not measured? And we've gone through the importance of this, and I do want you as students and as parents to ask these questions as you are making those decisions and building an application strategy that is fit for purpose. Fit for purpose for you as a student, fit for purpose for what you hope to achieve in the future, fit for purpose for the impact that you hope to leave on the world. And this is just really a case study that we could look at when it comes to different rankings and different outcomes. A student goal might be sustainability and employability. You can then focus it on US News top schools. Let's say you are only focusing on Ivy League schools. However, Times Higher Education impact studies will maybe show that UBC, Monash, and Arizona State would be the best place for you to go to when, as a student whose goal is to focus on sustainability and employability. And then LinkedIn is going to show that UC Berkeley and Georgia Tech might be the best school for you. What this does is that it gives you a long list of universities that you can then go and do deeper research on, and then think about where you might have that academic and personal fit. And key takeaways is it's a ranking, it's not a verdict. One ranking system saying that University Z is the best university in the world does not mean that this is the best university in the world. It is one source's perspective and view based on the methodology that they have used that this is the best university. Perhaps it doesn't align with your values, methodology, and what you hope to achieve. Understand what's measured versus what matters. And this is something that I also think is really key from today's webinar. Something can be measured. It doesn't necessarily mean that it matters to you as a student or it matters to your future. And the reverse is also true. Perhaps what matters to you is not measured. And so, how do you then find that information? Prioritizing fit over prestige and where they might land on a ranking system. And so these are just some resources that I definitely encourage you to have a look at. We've talked about some of these rankings, and then we have a really amazing blog on the Sesame website that I think that you as students and families, if you've not checked out in the past, do give it a look. Every month we release new topics, and so this might be a great starting point when thinking about all of these questions that you are considering, whether it is standardized tests or rankings or how to make a decision or building a balanced list. We've provided a lot of tools and resources on the blog for you to have a look at and to utilize at your discretion. So this is something that I want to leave you with. discuss your personal goals, explore which rankings matter the most for your priorities. And my overall hope is that this particular lesson has been, or webinar rather, has been fruitful for you and that there are key takeaways that you could then practice. The whole idea of the webinar is not just to provide information and an opinion, but it's rather for you to think about what we're talking about. Go back and ask yourself, what are the next steps that I need to take as a student or as a parent in order to utilize the information received, as well as then plan out what my next steps are. And so, with that in mind, I hope that the next few weeks, especially for seniors or students in grade 12, are going to be fruitful as you are making those final tweaks and changes to your college list. Take some time to really focus on what matters to you and research, research, research. Thank you so much for joining today's webinar.